Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this month's Worksoft webinar, Actionable Insights to Speed S-4HANA Modern Migration. I'm Austin Chandler, Senior Content Manager at Worksoft and your host for today's webinar. Today's presentation will be recorded and a link to the on-demand session will be available to anyone who's not able to attend or if you'd like to share or review the information. Due to a large number of participants, lines will be muted. We'll answer your questions at the end of our presentation. Please go ahead and use the questions feature to submit a question. If we don't get to yours due to time constraints, we'll send you a reply via email. Today, Worksoft Director of Pre-Sales, Ty Henson, will explore how the use of process intelligence and scalable automation engaged at each step of your SAP S/4HANA migration can help you prepare for a smooth transition and ensure delivery without disruption. You'll also discover how industry leaders have applied test automation to their own S4 journeys and driven optimization. Now I'll go ahead and turn things over to Ty.
All right, thank you, Austin. And welcome everyone. I come to you from partly sunny St. Louis, Missouri, and wherever you are, I hope that you're having a wonderful day. I'll turn on my camera just for a second, just for the introduction. I am Ty Henson, Director of Pre-Sales at Worksoft, and I've been doing Worksoft for about almost 16 years at this point. So it's a pleasure to join you today and to convey some very valuable information. So let's get underway. The title for today is Actionable Insights to Speed S/4HANA Modern Migration. And we had a lot of interest in this, and I understand why. But let's break down the title even for just a moment. Actionable Insights means I'm going to give you some information that will be very useful for you to know going into your modern migration. We want to speed it up. Clearly, automation will be involved, but we're going to break that down because it's not just automation. And modern migration kind of alludes to the fact that it's not new anymore. People have been migrating now to S4 for some time. So let's take advantage of those that have great information. And yet, how do we do that without making the same mistakes in a very modern way? So I've got a lot of great information. I suspect that you are looking into a migration to S4, possibly underway with that, or maybe even done with it. Honestly, regardless of where you're at, I'm going to have valuable information that will be very relevant to your initiative and your endeavor. So I hope that you find that to be the case. The bottom line is that it's not really my story. When I mention that it's a modern migration, this is going to be the words, and even I'm even going to try to bring literally the voices of some of our customers to the table in this presentation. It's their story. It's the ability to overcome the challenges that we're dealing with. So we're going to definitely look at the modern challenges that are involved and using then the right product from an automation perspective that can really enable your migration, and learning from their experiences along the way. So I'm literally going to try to bring their voices to the table today. We're going to stress out GoToWebinar a little bit, I think, in that way, but we'll see how it goes. And in the end, I'm going to just round it out, making sure that it's crystal clear the mechanisms that were used by these customers in overcoming the challenges with their migration. So in case you don't know, Worksoft has been around for a while, and we are an automation solution. In fact, this is all that we do. We innovate not only around automation itself, but outside of the boundaries of automation to expedite initiatives around creating automation and then maximizing the value that comes from all of the great data that we understand as a part of these initiatives. So I'm going to elaborate on that. We've been doing that with a lot of great customers, and many of them have gone through these migration efforts. Not all of them are SAP. So just kind of throwing that out there that, we're really able to do true end-to-end cross-application automation, replacing tedious repetitive activity with codeless, readable, collaborative automation that's sustainable. And that is applicable not only to testing, but even beyond testing and going into assisting the users with activity. So Worksoft is all about these things, and we're going to try to convey that also quite visually today. So with respect to the challenges, I think, in some cases, we're going to be stating the obvious here. Our application landscapes are complex. We didn't do this to ourselves to drive ourselves crazy. We did this often to go after best of breed technology for the different parts and different application features that we need to do our business, right? So in some cases, we're somewhat fragmented. As a result of that, we may have some poor experience in the integration or the interaction between our applications that we deal with at times. We've got, excuse me, technology risk in the fact that these things aren't always the same technology, and therefore in communicating or integrating, there can be hiccups, there can be things that we have to deal with. And yet in this complex landscape that we typically deal with, and this is very common across many customers that I speak with, it's difficult to keep up because every one of these applications is moving at a different pace and a different frequency, if you will. And yet our business processes really transcend all of it. So now we're talking about a major migration in SAP, and we absolutely can't disrupt our operations. We'll talk more about that. And how do we do that in the face of this complexity that we're already dealing with? Well, there is an answer, there is a solution, and many have achieved this, and that's what we're here to talk about. But the complexity itself is certainly one of the challenges. So once again, not surprisingly, I said I'm going to be stating a little bit of the obvious, but I love what SAP Insider pulls together in polling and in metrics. And so 87% say the most important requirement as they migrate to SAP S/4HANA is minimal disruption to operations. And as we just discussed, in the face of the complexity that we're already dealing with, it almost seems unachievable. But the answer is that it is. And so let's talk about how we can get there. This is going to be very relevant to our conversation as well. 39% of SAP S/4HANA customers underestimated the complexity of their migration. Okay, so what does that really mean? Well, there really can be various outcomes from this, but one of the most important is that it can significantly slow you down. If you don't know upfront what you're dealing with, if you don't understand the complexity of what you're dealing with, then you're going to be dealing with that on the fly. One analogy here might be I'm moving from one house to another. If I don't know what I actually have in the first house, how do I make any form of plans for dealing with that in the new house, right? And if I'm doing it on the fly, oh, I didn't realize we still had that. That's going to slow my initiative down. That's going to slow my move down. So that's where that comes into play, is really the need to be knowledgeable about really what's happening within our systems, regardless of the methodology. Now, you may be thinking, hey, we're going greenfield to S4, so maybe it doesn't matter. But there's still value in the knowledge of knowing where you're coming from. And so understanding what you're dealing with and the complexity of that is where we often get burned. Now, the last little metric here is 63% report that automation provides cost savings. That's kind of a no-brainer also. I mean, I think we're far enough along in technology and with automation to understand that it absolutely can be beneficial. But part of what I'm going to be trying to convey today is that automation is not just automation. It is the right automation that really can support your initiatives in the proper way and bring the value. Quick version is, if you're still using code-based automation, that's going to be much slower, much more brittle. And so there's the consideration is needed in terms of what am I actually going to be using as a tool, as a solution in my great migration to assist me with my transition. So automation is absolutely the key, but again, I'll keep reinforcing that it's more than just automation. So if automation alone were the element that solves all of our problems, then it would primarily be in the testing phases where that would become more relevant, in the realization of part of our journey, if you will. But in reality, automation and an automation solution, a proper automation solution, can assist us with every step along the way within our journey and provide value at every step along the way and make sure that we're going to achieve our goals on time and in budget, basically. So as early as the discovery, When I mentioned that Worksoft is innovating not just with automation, but around automation, we realized quickly that part of the challenge is the ability to build automation rapidly. And so we're absolutely going to take a closer look at that today. And that becomes very relevant within your discovery part of your process. The ability to understand what the users are doing, to eliminate that ignorance about the complexity of our processes begins in the discovery phase and continues then as we get into planning and making sure that we're equipped to accommodate using automation to save those tedious, repetitive, manual efforts along the way. In exploration, really understanding, once again, eliminating that ignorance around the complexity that might be involved, and really just knowing what we're dealing with as we move from one house to the next. There are mechanisms in true automation solutions that are going to facilitate and expedite our ability to be knowledgeable in that step of our journey. Realization, absolutely testing, and reusable automation to minimize the effort of doing that. Well, that's a core element that we will absolutely talk about. But then also what is often not realized is that after we've migrated, we still will need to be able to keep up with the volatility of change that will continue to happen. Regardless of what you're doing in today's modern technology, as you continue to move and update and upgrade your applications, typically you're going to find more and more updates happening. Let me just put it this way more generically. In any application in the past, we may have been experiencing more of like 2 major updates per year, and we need to be prepared for that testing. Well, in the agile world, those were often based on waterfall projects that take some time to come to fruition, and then we have testing cycles right before or right at the point that we are releasing those application updates. But now it's agile, and there's value in that. It's more interactive. We can react better during the process of our migration and our updates that are happening, but it drives much more need for testing. And so the frequency has increased considerably. And as we migrate into these newer modern versions of our applications, we are going to be faced with continuous updates and the need for continuous testing. So when we get to the run phase, we really are going to have to be able to keep up with that as well. Why not be able to leverage everything that we've used in automation leading up to that point? And the answer is that you absolutely can if you're using the right automation solution. Now, Worksoft has thought about this very purposefully. We've listened to the pain and challenges of our customers for all of these years. And as we innovate and as we've built out our platform, we have enhanced to the ability of being able to help you understand what your users are doing. That top purple circle, that understanding, really then unleashes our ability to take that understanding and use it to de-risk in the form of testing using automation, for example. That understanding also opens the door for knowing if we're doing things efficiently or not, and knowing if we need to go after optimization and having the data that we need for optimization, if in fact that is the case. So they're all very connected. It's a closed loop when automation is involved in the proper way, and that's the way that Worksoft has been thinking about this. Now, the other thing I want to throw out here is that you might be thinking already, hey, I mentioned it earlier, we're going greenfield, we're starting fresh, right? And there's every version under the sun of how you're going to get from point A to point B. You might be, there's brownfield, there's lift and shift, there's many names, some of them even proprietary to the partner that you might be working with. So I'm trying to be extremely generic here. What I really wanted to express is the fact that regardless of the model you're going after, regardless of what your initiative consists of, automation, the proper automation solution, is going to provide value. So it's not exactly bound to exactly how we're going after our initiative, but rather the ability to serve us and provide value regardless of the model that we've chosen. And with end-to-end automation, I like this quote from Sachin, the Director of IT Development and Delivery at Pepsi. So I'm going to read this one just to make sure everybody has seen it. But end-to-end automation has allowed us to gain efficiency and uncover defects we wouldn't have normally seen manually. We use automation to validate data loads and identify data defects early, and we've automated close to 100% of our regression testing to build a foundation for the future. Now, there's a lot going on there. First of all, we are uncovering defects that would not have been caught manually. That's because the frequency is increased, and yet with each testing cycle that we need to do, we have to do it comprehensively. Automation can keep up with that, manual testing cannot. We use automation to validate data loads and identify data defects early. Two different things there. One is using automation outside of testing to actually perform some activities. We're getting into the spectrum of RPA at this point. The RPA, or robotic process automation spectrum, starts pre-production. It's when we start to use automation to perform operational activities and assist the users. Now, that's most often thought of as letting it participate in production in a business process. That's absolutely part of that spectrum. But we can use automation earlier to benefit from the operational aspects of our endeavors as well. And so Sachin is pointing that out, and I love that he did. Excuse me. And finally, the last part of his quote, we've automated close to 100% of our regression testing to build a foundation for the future. So he is also helping to reinforce what I was saying about the fact that we have to be prepared to keep up even after the migration going forward. So quite a bit going on, but to summarize again, regardless of the model you're going after, the right automation solution is going to be needed. Now, when it comes to the complexity concept, you may have been hearing and accepting what I was saying, and in fact, you may even accept exactly what I'm going to say here, but I'm going to add one little nugget just in case you don't. But you might already be smiling and nodding, okay, I get this. Yeah, you know, we think what we know are what our business processes are. We define them early, we release them to our users, but in fact, do they remain the true business process as we go live, as we begin to use our application? In reality, part of this complexity comes from the fact that the variations of flow that begin to exist for our business processes are unknown to us when the users are actually using our applications. You will hear some of our customers refer to the fact that we really don't know our business processes. And what they really mean is we knew them in the beginning, but we don't really know anymore exactly what the users are doing. Now, some of you may be thinking, I get that. I understand exactly what Ty's talking about there. But let me use a little analogy, a real one. Recently from a conference that I attended, it was one where there was a concert, like on the third day of the conference, right? And so yet this was not in a concert hall, if you will. This was in Vegas. This was in just a very large room. So there was just normal resources, hotel resources, officiating here, basically making sure that we were all behaving and doing what we needed to. At the end, let me speed this up. At the end, we needed to exit this part, this concert area, if you will. So they had set up ropes to take us down this path and lead us to an exit door. And in the beginning, everyone began to follow. That was our business process, to follow this path and go out this door. But people that were more familiar with the space realized that there were some better ways to do this. And a few additional lines started to form to some other doors that maybe not all of us knew about. And yet they were doing variations of this exit, right? And that's where the variations begin to exist. Now, in the beginning, some of those variations of lines seem to be more efficient, or at least as efficient and probably acceptable in that way. In the end, and of course the one that I followed, there was a line that formed to a door, and honestly, if I would have just stayed in the original line, I would have exited sooner. Where I'm going with that is there will also be variations that begin to happen that we determine to be inefficient or not appropriate, right? And unless we know about them, then we can't deal with them. And so the knowledge is really the key, and that's where the proper automation solution comes into play, it's got to participate to this level and make sure that we're aware of what we're dealing with, like the analogy of moving to from one house to the next. Something that will allow us to understand exactly what we're dealing with. And so that's the complexity story, at least in part, and hopefully the analogy helped to reinforce that for anybody that was maybe a skeptic in the beginning. Last but not least, one of the challenges also, and I've already alluded to this a little bit, is the fact that as we release, we've got to be able to keep up. So this is a little more complicated than I needed at this point, but I'm just going to go ahead and use this graph to show that as we're going through the stages of our migration, we need to be able to tap in and provide value with an automation solution at all parts, not only pre-release, but also post-release, in making sure that we can keep up with that demand going forward. So this was a little extra, if you will, but I wanted to include that, and I'm happy to circle back with anybody that's interested and talk more specifically and at a much lower level in terms of exactly how we're going to apply these things. Today, we're going to do that a little bit more generically or conceptually, yet it is the Worksoft connective automation platform that is providing the value that will help us through these challenges and that have helped our customers through these challenges. And I've chosen some snippets from some of our customers to help tell that story. I'm going to introduce this in more detail a little bit later in this session. So I just wanted to give you kind of an initial glimpse of the fact that there's several parts involved, but yet they're connected. They all are based on the data around our initiative and our needs for automation, both for testing and for assisting users, and especially applied during migration initiatives. But the connective is really the key word. Hopefully what I'm going to reinforce with you today, not only through the customer stories, but also with the visuals in the end, is that when I keep saying the proper automation solution, what I really mean is that something that's going to not only participate at every step, but allow that value to transcend from step to step as we go through our journey. So with respect to the customers, Heather Whitfield at Applied Materials has been working with Worksoft for a long time, and we love working with Heather. I will use the opportunity to say that, I keep saying that we innovate within codeless automation, but also around it. It is our customers and their experiences that help drive part of our strategy, right? We innovate, but we also listen, and we throw technology at pain to solve problems. So Heather's been a big part of that with us from Applied Materials. I'm going to let Heather's slide itself introduce Applied Materials in case you're not familiar, but world's #1 semiconductor and display equipment company, quite large, and we enjoy working with Applied. I'm going to let Heather's voice tell part of the story, and in getting to this first one, let me just explain that here's what I've done. So across the board, again, kind of regardless of the methodology or the model of migration that you've chosen, there are things that we as Worksoft begin to hear that perfectly align. Though no two customers really are the same, at a higher level, that some of these challenges are very similar from customer to customer. So what I've chosen to do is to take some audio, some video, and in some case just some quotes from some of our customers that we've enjoyed working with, and carve out some of those areas that I'm referring to tell you a more holistic story in the end using the variety of their inputs. So with Heather, she's going to set the stage. I think this is the longest one, and this is the big question mark here in GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. I'm going to, even though it's quoted, I'm going to let Heather's voice tell the story. It'll just take a moment. This is the longest one of the vignettes that I'm going to use. So you can follow the words and you'll hear Heather telling the story. I do want to show you that in the middle, Heather had switched to the slide that talked about the 39% of SAP S-4HANA customers underestimating the complexity of their migration. So as her tone changes and as she begins to kind of switch gears here in the middle, that's the visual reference that she's referring to. Let's see if we can get this across the table properly.
A lot of good reasons why companies are making this shift to S4. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's coming out. There's a lot that's really going to help our business partners. Improved end user satisfaction, better integration. Analytics is always huge. Any way that they can see what's happening in their environment and make decisions. So there's a lot that's coming for that. And folks are using this as an opportunity to move to the cloud. We are. We're starting to look at how can we include cloud migration into all of this. And then, of course, we have to. The ECC is coming to an end. But again, how can you leverage the opportunities that this is going to provide to help meet automation strategies, automation goals, and to really accelerate becoming more digital? I mean, I think everybody would agree. This white paper is suggesting that there's a lot of folks that have said they've underestimated the complexity of their migration. We really need to find a systemic way to be able to manage some of this complexity for our business. For us, we know that there's going to be challenges with process understanding. For the last 15 years, I've spent building the automation program. Number one challenge, the business really does not understand their processes completely. They think they do, but they really don't. And if we can't get that process knowledge, how are we going to do this work? It's a huge barrier.
So Heather was elaborating on her insights going into a migration effort, and there's really a couple of bullets that I want to pull from what she said. First of all, and foremost, use your project as an opportunity. It's never going to feel like the right time to get automated. I think many of us realize the value of automation, but the task itself feels daunting. Now, I'm going to express and showcase some visuals that show that we can make that easier, and I think that will help in this thought process. But there's no doubt, as Heather mentions here, that with your migration, you can leverage that as an opportunity to get where you need to be digitally. And she also starts to refer to the fact that we don't really know our processes. And that's what helped drive the initiative around maximizing the use of our data around automation. You know, when we go after our automation initiative, let's begin to help measure where we're at. So I'll show you what I'm referring to a little bit later. Heather has planted the seed for us. And yet the interesting result of her indicating that they don't know their processes is that she's going to turn around and talk about where do they go with that. And really, I'll just go ahead and proactively say that it's the people. It's that we really do know our processes in the form of the knowledge of our personnel, right? But we may not know it unless we're looking at that collectively. So the people are so vital and integral. Let Heather tell that part of the story.
So what we're doing, we've started by focusing on the people first, looking at the process knowledge we have within our business, not just relying on the functional resources that we think have a lot of this knowledge, but actually looking into the business itself to try to take this inventory of what process knowledge is out there, who we need to become part of the program, who we really need to bring in, and then looking to see where we have gaps.
Now, Heather said that more eloquently than my proactive inject there. Really, it's going beyond the functional resources and getting into the knowledge of the actual resources of the application. So that's the key. I'm going to let that seed stand for the moment. We'll talk more about that. And I'd like to proceed to the next step in our journey, which is to talk a little bit about Dutch Railways. There's a couple of gentlemen that we've enjoyed working with from Dutch Railways. You can, again, letting their slide kind of tell the story. I'm just blown away by 1.2 million train journeys every day. But we really enjoy working with Wout and Vincent. So let's get into letting them add some nuggets to our story. With Wout Jacobs, he's the test automation architect at Dutch Railways, and I've got a video of him. And I realize the audio may not be perfect to hear, and that's why I'm trying to summarize as well. I wanted this to be in their voice as much as possible. So we're going to listen to a little snippet from Wout. But in the end, what he's doing here is he's establishing up front, or he's explaining that what they did was establish up front the requirements, and yet ultimately these requirements were met with the proper automation solution. So let me just let Wout tell that part of the story.
Obviously, selecting any type of test automation, first of all, you need to define the goals. There's several different goals involved here. First of all, really speeding up all the testing cycles that we have. Because there's several go-live dates. The earlier we have anything automated in testing, the more often we can use it, the more often we can get the benefits out of faster testing rather than automated rather than manual testing. Coverage as well. So the earlier we started automating, of course, we could expand our test coverage with every single test run. We would at least cover what we already built, but we would also expand the coverage over the whole program. And one thing that's important here as well, of course, is to detect defects as early as possible. So detect them either in your test environment or acceptance environment, or you can do some unit testing even on development environments, depending on what you have. But for us, we did this on the test environment. We could really test this in early phase.
All right, thank you, Wout. Quite a bit going on there, but so spot on. He's talking about speeding testing, and that's probably the most obvious part. When we think of we need to integrate automation for our efforts, there is no doubt that that absolutely is going to be a requirement and one that needs to be met well along the way. But Wout also elaborated on not just that, but the increase in the frequency of the testing cycles. That also, we may have been thinking about, but then coverage, and bam, is he so spot on there. Basically what it comes down to, and what we sometimes lose sight of, is the fact that if we are not testing the system the exact same way the users are using the system, then we have gaps in testing. So how do we know if we are covered? How do we know that we are doing all of the automation that our users that we're using automation to represent all of the manual physical activity that the users are doing regularly? So we'll talk more about that in a moment. Wout has planted the seed quite eloquently, and finalized with detecting defects and needing to be able to even to do that as soon as possible. His colleague will elaborate on that more in just a moment. There was just a little bit more from Wout that I wanted to include. Let's hit on that now.
What we find really important is that we have one source of truth, so that we have one way of accessing our test results, one way of managing our tests, one way of managing our test data that we're using. So that's why we have both tools, but we have them synced together. So Certify actually calls SoapUI, and then any SoapUI test, in theory, it could run separately. But what we do is we have a connection with the Certify, so we call everything from Certify itself. So we have all our test results ready in Certify. That's the way that it's being run independently. But what we of course want to do is we want to run a whole test set. What we do actually every morning, early morning, we have a Worksoft Execution Manager, which actually kicks off the different test suites. So it kicks off a test suite for logistics, for finance, for procurement. That's all being run remotely, so we don't have to look at it that early in the morning. But when we get into the office, say 8 or 9 o'clock, our test results are in, all tests have been run, and we can actually see the results from that every single day. What we also do is we publish our test results. So we use an API out of Worksoft Execution Manager, and we publish our results, and we publish them on Confluence in this case. Doesn't really matter, it could be any web-based application where you can publish results. We choose Confluence because the development teams are using Confluence to store the data. We can just push it there, anybody can access it. And I'm going to refer back to that later on in this presentation, but for me it's really key that everybody can access this test data. It's not just testers, it's not just developers, but really everybody can just go to the Confluence page, go into the office in the morning, check the page, see actually how your tests have been run. You can see what has failed and what has passed. So really get it out of scope of just the tester, but get the whole team involved there. That's something I find really important, to get the whole team involved, so I'll definitely be referring back to that later on as well.
So a lot to unpack there too, but I'm going to do it quickly. I thought it was important to include this because some of the things that were going on were, first of all, Wout was looking for one source of truth. And he did mention that 2 products were in play, but it's a great story about how they had some API testing already happening in SOAP UI. And yet when Worksoft Certify was introduced, it became the broker. It became the starting point to manage all of the execution, even though it could tap right into the SOAP UI execution that was happening. The next part was his indication of the fact that the frequency had increased, and in fact, they were to the point of doing nightly testing. And how else to keep up with that than with an automation solution that provides for that capability? So I'll show you what that looks like in just a few minutes, but that's an integral part of being able to do testing at scale in parallel and get results much faster, and yet do all of that in the background using a virtual background. And last but not least, we are often faced with the fact that customers are doing something that they want to continue to do, even though they're interested in using Worksoft automation. And I like to use this opportunity to say that we're extremely flexible and extremely interoperable with other products. So Wout elaborates on the fact that they were doing dashboards in Confluence. He wants convenient access to every user to know exactly what's going on. And not only is that transparency quite relevant, it was easy for them to establish through the interoperability from the proper automation solution. So some of these nuggets, I just wanted to express them here. I'm gonna summarize them in just a moment as we talk a little bit more about the connective automation platform. As we're nearly there, but Wout has a colleague, Vincent, who has elaborated here just in quote form. I'm not going to play the audio from Vincent, but really what Vincent is referring to is that reusable automation supports DevOps and QA. And I wanted to represent their experience there to really, or use their experience there to represent the fact that as I've mentioned, we are quite interoperable and can fit into any methodology that's being used. In fact, you may even still have waterfall in some parts of your business and DevOps or Agile in other parts of your business, and to be able to do both is also quite seamless. So Certify and Process Capture will help you gain the business knowledge quickly. I'm going to be showing you a visual of that, but then he's also reinforced the fact that those continue on into reusable assets, providing more value through less maintenance, and then also supports that DevOps or QA initiative across the board. Vincent also mentions, and I'm just going to hit this quickly, and Wout alluded to this a little bit as well in terms of finding defects earlier, but an automation solution not only capable of doing that end-to-end regression so that we can comprehensively test our systems, but also the ability to shift left and even provide for functional testing that can be quite advantageous in the Agile methodologies for projects, basically. And your implementation, your migration may actually, in fact, be Agile. So the ability to shift left is important, but also the ability to shift right and run and maintain even after we've delivered on our initiative. Now, the last one, and I'm watching the clock, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. But Jinda Ranjan is with 3Run, and he's consulting for BASF. I'm going to use a couple of nuggets from Jinda, but as a consultant, as you might imagine, he's more about quantifying and measuring and the metrics that are involved. Yet I couldn't go past this quote. I honestly don't know if it's Jinda's quote or if he was quoting someone else from the context that I received this, but it's a valuable quote nonetheless. ERP is 90% about people, and we've talked a little bit about that. Heather started that part of our story, but it's about the people, process, and culture, and politics, and 10% about IT. Misunderstand that, and you are heading for failure. So I really just like his quote to reinforce that concept about the people. At BASF, Worksoft Connective Automation Platform is being used in all stages of the automation clusters, having the potential to save up to 90% of manual testing activities. Jinda has a couple of nuggets that I wanted to add to our repertoire of information here in telling our story. So I'm going to let him talk about script creation cost being reduced by up to 75%.
Demand management, we decrease the script solution creation by 75% because we have a modular platform approach, because we have explore integrate, not an end-to-end, not a uniform. It's decreasing the cost. If you look at Worksoft, if you look at Ignacio, if you look at any other tools out there, presenters, there's always a cost for license, of course. But what is the main cost? It's not the license. The main cost is you need to put resources into the automation cycle, and this is the cost. The resources are the cost. So you're decreasing you're decreasing the cost, so you're decreasing in the end capacity, and you're increasing capacity, and you're definitely decreasing the cost what you have to for resources. For those who sorry. You can see here an indicator how stable this platform approach works. So in 40% of the cases, it's being everything run automatically overnight. So there's nothing attended, it's everything overnight in 40% of the cases. This just gives you the impression. On the one side, we have processes, what we run automatically. On the other side, you can ask yourself, okay, but how often it interrupts? Because data interrupts in the system. You have CMRs, you have other tools, you have any other customer master data chain. So there is a high potential that you automate something from a process perspective, but then it interrupts. So then actually you never can do it overnight. So this indicator gives you there is a maturity given. Otherwise, we are not able to run it 40% overnight.
So to elaborate on that just a little bit, what I let Jinda continue to go on and say is that he was reinforcing the fact, well, right away, out of the gates, he said, we were able to reduce our script creation cost by up to 75%. That meant that they were able to move quickly. They were able to create the necessary automation rapidly. Now, the reason why behind that is because the people doing these manual repeatable operations is costly. That's what he was referring to with respect to the people. So being able to replace tedious repetitive with automation is extremely important. And in fact, they were to the point where they were running 40% overnight, and they were continuing down that journey, basically. But in the end, what he was referring to also is, how do you even get to that point if your automation is breaking regularly? Not just automation, but you have to have the right automation, sustainable automation that is capable of staying alive and providing for these types of results. And it's only modern automation. And in fact, they're using Worksoft automation for this purpose that can keep up with that. Now, the other nugget that I wanted to give, and I think this one's extremely quick from Jinda, I'm going to let him mention it, and then we'll elaborate and round things out.
We were able to try if what we have realized in ECC rule, if it's getting applied in S-4HANA, and it did. So you do not have, if you ask yourself the question, if I do it in ECC, it doesn't work in S-4HANA? Yes, it does. it works.
All right. And that was a quick nugget, but basically what he's saying is don't wait. I've had many people tell me, yeah, we're headed for S4, so we're probably going to wait to get there and then build some automation. And what Gene is trying to express to you is that you can build automation now, you can benefit from that automation now, and that automation will migrate with you. You do not have to rebuild it as you move from ECC to S4. It carries forward and it works. And that was Gene elaborating on that particular part of the story. Last but not least, Christopher Pete from Ariel, and I'm not going to use his audio, but Christopher basically was pleasantly surprised in applying the proper automation to their initiatives. They were able to go live with their migration 2 months ahead of schedule, and they've come out of this with 75% testing faster in their initiatives. Now, there's more to Christopher's story, but I wanted to latch onto that as kind of the summarization of the elements that I've put together along our journey here today. So what did we hear? And my apologies that has gone off the bottom of the page. I didn't catch that earlier. But just as a reminder, Heather started to talk about using your project as an opportunity and the fact that the people, not just the functional people, are the ones that are going to give you true process knowledge, right? Wout elaborated on the obvious that we need to be able to speed up testing, we need to be able to increase regression, but he specifically called out coverage. How do we know where we're at? And being able to detect defects early, which was also mentioned by Vincent in terms of shifting left and being able to catch things sooner in the process. Wout and Jinda both mentioned the ability to run every night, be able to do the testing to accommodate for these more frequent testing cycles that we're going through. And then with Jinda, he's more consultative and more metric oriented. And so he was specifically stating percentages like 90% coverage that they had achieved and 75% faster based on historically what they've been doing. But very important here in the end is that you also shouldn't wait, that there's value to be had. It's never going to feel right, like the exact right time, but automation can begin to kick in value early. And Jinda is confirming that we can move from ECC to S4 with our automation. And Christopher is the one that I used to kind of tell the story that they applied all of these things. They made some mistakes along the way, but yet they still came in 2 months early and have come out of those gates in their new environment with 75% faster initiatives around testing and automation. So how did they do that? You've heard me refer to Worksoft automation along the way and the fact that I keep mentioning that it needs to be the right automation, but I'd like to kind of summarize in this way using just a couple of slides and a couple of more video vignettes, not with sound, but I'll show you what I'm referring to. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words, if you've not seen some of the things I'm about to show you, it will help reinforce the understanding for how they were able to achieve those initiatives in these complex landscape S4 migrations that they needed to achieve without disrupting the business. So Heather, Vincent, and Jinda all mentioned using the people to know the process. And with the connective automation platform, we've basically built up codeless automation and we've continued to innovate until we were in this platform form, yet everything is connective. With Capture, this is very much a recording element. I'm going to show you a little visual here. If I click on Capture, this recording element that we call Capture allows you to put this in the hands of the users. This, in some cases, will be the only thing that those users have. They can then perform their processes. In this case, we're placing a Fiori order. And as we do, you're going to start seeing the steps start to appear in Capture. Now, I keep saying that it's basically a recording, but it's more than just record. Capture is a very powerful yet easy to use element to allow any user to contribute their process. We're going to pick up the steps automatically. And in the end, what I'm just going to be showing you here visually yet quickly is the fact that we are collecting everything that we need at this moment from the user to be able to turn around and produce documentation, step-by-step automation to replay these steps, and a functional understanding of exactly what that user is doing, so that we can bring that together with what other users are doing and know collectively what's happening within our system. So 3 very valuable outcomes beginning from this capture experience. And I'd like to show you what I'm referring to. So this is that element. Now, when I say it's more than just record, let me enhance that for just a moment. You notice there's a few buttons at the top. I'm not going to turn this into training, but as the user is contributing in this way, they can choose to insert comments. They can choose to insert screenshots. They can choose to insert verification steps. They can correct a mistake. You can see that there's trash cans here. I can delete steps that I accidentally performed. I can drag and drop steps to reorder them very conveniently. It is basically a mini editor, yet it's super simple to use, and it deputizes any user to be able to contribute their process without having to do a time and motion study and pull people into conference rooms and ask them to put sticky notes on glass walls, right? This is them using their muscle memory to just do what they normally do in process form, and we collect everything that we need. So capture is that mechanism, and I don't really have time to show it in other forms. I showed it against Fiori, but it goes well beyond that. GUI, and even outside of SAP, we can capture other applications. But in the end, I mentioned the 3 outcomes, and that's what I want to switch to and show you a few of those things. One of them is documentation. So when the user performs that capture, I do want to kind of put a little pin in this visual right here. At the top of the document, we're going to say, here's the functional flow that the user performed. That's really our way of saying, here's what's in the document, but I'll show you how this comes into play in just more so in just a moment. But basically the heart of this document is we take a screenshot when capture starts, and then we use that narrative that we are creating to explain every step. We grab object imagery, all of it in chronological order to fully document exactly what that user has done. Now, whether you're doing that here in Fiori, or here's a Salesforce Lightning opportunity, user turns it on and we're capturing and documenting every step along the way. Here is SuccessFactors. I just wanted to show a few examples where, these are important applications where many users can easily contribute. And again, they're not only contributing documentation, but they're contributing automation as well. So let me elaborate on that. If I go back to this big picture, documentation is one of the outcomes, but another outcome is that we get the step-by-step. These are the same steps that came from capture. I know it's kind of an eye test, but on the far right, there's a readable narrative. This is just a demonstration showing side by side the readable steps firing off and reperforming those actions on behalf of the user. So the key element to keep in mind here is that what was the user performing these things and us recording them originally is now our ability to replay these steps and reperform those actions on behalf of the user. Now, without going into the weeds, of course, we can add decisions. Of course, we can add verifications. We even talked about that in capture. Those can be added very early in the process. So it can be intelligent, robust automation, yet there is never, ever any programming. And it's very collaborative because we can read and understand the steps, and it's very sustainable in the mature engine that Worksoft uses to provide for this automation. Now, the third outcome is the functional understanding. And so I'd like to bounce over and show you that for every capture that we perform, we're going to save that centrally into something we call process intelligence. Basically, this is a single capture. The user did an outbound delivery, but the next user, when they clicked save on their capture, did more of a business process. And you can see that we've collected all of the functions. As the users kept doing captures and clicking save, this is what it looked like for them to be brought in. We can see them independently. We can understand them better in terms of what's going on, but the real magic kicks in when we ask our algorithms to put this together. That same series of captures really looks like this when we ask our product to overlay them into what are the real variations of flow that are happening here. So this is where that knowledge comes from. By allowing users to contribute their captures, we have a perfect understanding of what's really happening in the system. Through coloration, we can show what's automated and what's not. The blue is where we are testing. The green is where we are using RPA or digital workers. And the orange is actually the defined business process so that we can measure against it and know the volatility of activity that's happening by the users. So think about what we've talked about along the way. The fact that complexity and knowing the real complexity in our system was part of the challenge. Now we will be knowledgeable, but we will also have the documentation and the automation to go along with that. So to really reinforce that, every capture produces documentation, automation, and functional understanding. And though that in itself is important, it's really wonderful to think about the fact that when I put capture in many users' hands, I'm now crowdsourcing this information. On the left are some experiences for which they might turn on capture, but not an exhaustive set. You know, maybe they're doing user acceptance testing as a part of your migration effort. Turn on capture. You're going to get documentation, automation, and functional understanding. This is what facilitates the projects that our customers have gone through. And these are some of the mechanisms within the connective automation platform that are being used to present this material. Of course, in the end, we are going to be helping measure your journey. All of our data rolls up to a dashboard where we're going to let you know exactly where you stand and even provide suggestions about where you need to go next in terms of your automation for the most value. And keep in mind that even if you start while on ECC, it will carry forward to your S4 environment. And we even have a converter to go from GUI to Fiori Web GUI as a part of our platform. So in the end, and just to summarize, there's many things to keep in mind, but these hopefully for you were actionable insights that you can consider and go in knowledgeable into your initiatives. Manual testing can never cover the breadth of what you need to accomplish, so automation has to be part of the picture. Yet what we've learned time and again throughout this experience is that it's not just generic automation, but rather automation that can assist you at every stage along the way. Take advantage of it, the proper automation. Let it help you speed your delivery. And that's really what a modern migration is all about. I've taken us down to the wire, and I do apologize for that, but I don't know, Austin, maybe we can take one question before we wrap things up.
Sure. We'll just take one, and then we'll wrap for the day. Let's do. Can a user save a capture and finish it later?
Yes. So I refer to it kind of as a mini editor, and that's one of the capabilities, and that's important. You know, maybe I start capturing something and I get interrupted. You click the save button, you can reload it later and pick up from where you left off. So very robust for any user to contribute in that way.
Great. If there are any other questions, we will make sure to get to you via email. We'll respond in that way. Thanks, Ty, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning for this webinar. We hope you gained some insight into how top teams use automation to smooth S4 transformation and also just optimize for ongoing change. A link to the recording will be sent within the next business day. Other than that, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.